just landed at a ranch at Corona, New Mexico. The rancher turned it over to the Air Force. Rancher W.W. Brazil was the man who discovered the saucer.
What I thought was a star began coming in my direction at a very rapid rate of speed.
The unidentified object, which some sources thought might be a blimp, moved slowly down the Pacific coast from Santa Monica and disappeared south of Long Beach.
I saw a UFO, and it went down the river, turned right at the United Nations, turned left, and then down the river.
UFO classified. UFO classified. No more plausible deniability. Fact, fiction, or the truth. You decide. And now, the new voice of the high desert, the hostess of UFO Classified, Erica Lukes.
Good afternoon, good evening, my friends. I'm Erica Lukes. I was happy to spend my Friday evenings with you, and I want to welcome all of my favorite people into chat. Thank you for tuning in every Friday, and I especially want to give a big thanks to my right-hand man with regard to UFO Classified. Northern UFOs has done more to keep this show on the air than anybody I know. He has been incredibly supportive, donated money, because as all of you know, or should know, this show is a show that I paid for every Friday because I know that this is important information to get to the public, and nobody's doing it. So please go to ufoclassified.com or KCOR and show your support for the show. Help keep us on the air, because we are living in a time right now where we are this close to seeing UFO history completely erased, and the whole goal is to rewrite the history, and it is alarming. Last week I had my friends and mentors, Gordon Lohr, who was with NICAP, who saw the organization get infiltrated by the CIA, eventually shut down, and Barry Greenwood and Jan Aldrich, all of these people, they have been around and they're preserving history for us, but we need to make sure that that history is not going to people that don't have the right idea in mind. We need to make sure it stays here in America. We need to get this information out. It is critical, and I cannot stress to you how important it is. I also want to say that my guest this evening, my friend Nick Redfern, who's been on the show many times, both of us have discussed at length the fact that this subject is being monitored and manipulated by people from Russia and probably elsewhere in the world. And if you don't think this is really happening, then let me tell you, I think you need to get a clue, and probably sooner than later. Right now with social media, unfortunately, what we have are a lot of people setting up fake profiles. They're setting up fake groups. They're hiding under anonymity, and that is a very, very dangerous thing. And I've stressed that, and I cannot tell you enough that you need to really be mindful. I would not be putting personal information with regards to UFO sightings and locations out there online. I would also really look at the groups that you're involved with, and I would par it down. I have an anonymous source within the national security world, and he has informed me and confirmed my deepest fears that the Russian IRA, the Internet Research Agency, and the Russian GRU routinely penetrates the American UFO online social network to create fake social network accounts and websites in an attempt to spread destructive disinformation, to create discord and discontent, and other active measures. They track down people who are in the community and are working with the U.S. military, and UFOs is the name of the game. I have also been informed that they are very keen to find out how Navy UFO encounters are affecting military sensors, weapons, technologies. And so, my friends, and also how America is reacting to it. So if you don't think that every social media Facebook group that you belong to is not got a person in there that is playing for the other team, then you need to think again. This is serious, it is real, and I know that by the end of tonight, thanks to Nick Redfern, who just wrote the book Flying Saucers from the Kremlin, UFOs, Russian Meddling, Soviet Spies, and Cold War Secrets. If you have any doubt after listening to this show, then I don't know what to tell you, but you probably need to listen to a different show that maybe, I don't know, supports delusional thinking. So, Mr. Redfern, welcome to the show. This is going to be a good one tonight. I always enjoy having you here, especially when this is a topic that, as you and I both know, people are not getting the importance of this in the UFO community.
Well, yeah, you're right. I think, the subject of UFOs, I should say, has kind of two sides to it. You've got the real phenomenon, and then you've got the way in which intelligence agencies around the world manipulate or use that phenomenon for various reasons. And you can make a good argument that both sides of the coin, so to speak, are as important as the other. Yes, there's a real phenomenon, a real UFO phenomenon, and it's incredibly profound and incredible if, we found the final answer to it. But equally, the way in which the subject has been used and manipulated and twisted for intelligence purposes, that, for me, is just as important, because it demonstrates how agencies around the world have sort of tried to manipulate the mindset of the public and using the UFO subject to do so. So in that sense, it's a very important and also disturbing angle as well.
Well, it absolutely is. And you've written, you are one of the most prolific authors in the subject. You've written over 45, 50 books now, including Women in Black and the Roswell UFO Conspiracy, my all-time favorite, Final Events, which I mention all the time and encourage my listeners to read. But how do you feel, with all of the books that you've written, what is the importance of this book to you that you've just come out with?
Well, I think more than anything else, it demonstrates that, the Russians have meddled in our activities. There's no doubt about that, because one of the important things about the book is that I use a lot of Freedom of Information Act material, which actually talks about how agencies like the CIA were concerned that the Russians were sort of like dangling carrots, so to speak, to the people who worked in the U.S. intelligence community and who happened to have an interest in UFOs, and the KGB were trying to sort of reel them in by luring them with fake UFO material in return for information on the stealth fighter and the stealth bomber. And this was back in the 80s when, the stealth aircraft were highly classified still. And also in the 50s, and again through the Freedom of Information Act, we know now that the CIA again and the FBI were particularly concerned that the Russians were spreading fake UFO stories as a means to try and suggest, on the one hand, that the aliens were actually communists, which sounds really strange and bizarre today, but that was actually really one of the real programs that the Russians put forward. And they actually sort of hired and enlisted a number of the famous contactees of the 50s, essentially to say, if you will sort of, when you're talking on the lecture circuit or at lectures and conferences on radio, and, you're talking about UFOs, would you mind kind of talking about things from the angle of a communist angle and suggesting that, communism and the alien phenomenon goes together? And, so this angle, if you like, of Russian meddling goes back a long way. And anyone who says there is no such thing as Russian meddling is an idiot.
I just love the way you put things out, and you're right. They are.
Well, the
idiots.
Thing is, people. I don't know what it is in today's world, but people seem to forget that at the height of the Cold War, there were quite literally hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of nuclear weapons aimed at the West. And they're still aimed at the West now. It's not like the Russians have laid down their nuclear weapons or their aircraft or ships or submarines. I'd recommend anyone who's interested do some research on how many nuclear warheads are actually held on each Russian submarine. If you go looking, you'll find the information. It might take a while, but you'll find it. And, both sides have enough nuclear material, to destroy each other, umpteen times over. So, in that sense, to say that, the Russians are our friends and, they're helping us, etc., it's garbage. The Russians are our potential enemy, and the only reason they won't start anything is because they know we've just got just as much firepower as they do, and so we're in a stalemate situation because both sides know that neither side can win. But that doesn't mean they're not trying their utmost to do what they can to change that. They clearly are, but some people just don't listen,
Yeah, well, they don't, and I think it's unfortunate. And we're really living in a time where we're seeing, unfortunately, a lot of corruption on both sides of our political aisle, and it's too bad. But I think the thing that's been really interesting for me, and I've mentioned this to you personally and then on my show numerous times or in lectures that I give, is the fact that now that I've got this archive that spans back from 1947 on, I am absolutely stunned to see how many ads were taken by political and religious factions in the back of all of these UFO publications. So, there very clearly has been an attempt, and it appears to be succeeding with regard to manipulating the subject, manipulating the community. And I think, from what I hear, there was a conference a few weeks ago where, unfortunately, a speaker got up and proclaimed certain things to be accurate and really tried to steer the narrative politically, and that's dangerous. That has no place in the study of UFOs. Mm.
You're right, and that's where the big problem comes in. And one of the sort of the primary things that I talk about in the opening pages of the book, so to speak, kind of gets to the heart of what you're talking about. Again, through the Freedom of Information Act, I got files from the FBI from 1947, the summer of 47, when this pretty much all kicked off with Kenneth Arnold and Roswell, etc. And the FBI had a deep concern that the Russians were actually spreading bogus UFO stories in the United States, not just using Russian agents who'd infiltrated the US itself, but also people who were open to communism in the United States, US citizens who were communist, but closet communists, if you like. They were also approached, and the FBI got a lot of information and was deeply concerned by the theory that the Russians were trying to, in one sense, it's actually two different things going on. One was to try and convince the U.S. government that flying saucers were actually Russian, and that the Russians had far greater power and technology and firepower, and it was all coming from Moscow. That was the one side. Now, the other thing, which is sort of a little bit more subtle, is, and again, this gets really to the heart of some of these incredible stories. The FBI, under the terms of the Freedom of Information Act, have revealed and released their surveillance file on George Adamski, the famous or infamous contactee of the 1950s. Now, for people who don't know who the contactees were, they were people who in the 50s onward claimed close encounters with very human-looking aliens, and these aliens would warn us about potential use of atomic weapons and how we could end up blowing each other up. Now, what a lot of people don't know is that the existence of this FBI surveillance file on Adamski. Now, a small portion of it, about 50 pages, was actually released in the early 1980s. Up to about 2-3 years ago, there was somewhere in the region of about 200 pages was put in the public domain by the FBI. Today, it's close to 500 surveillance pages on George Adamski. And the FBI's deep concern was that in many of his early lectures, Adamski talked about how the aliens that he met, including one of the most famous ones he claimed to have met, named Orthon, he said that their government was very much like a communist-type government. And he went on to talk about how not only were the aliens communist, but also they were in a position to destroy the United States if they felt that, they wanted to do that. Now, that literally is what George Adamski said. This is actually recorded and transcribed in his lectures. Now the FBI, I'm sure, would not have cared a little bit really if Adamski was just lecturing to maybe 5 or 10 people on a Sunday afternoon. But that wasn't the case. His first book, written in 1953, Flying Saucers Have Landed, co-written with Desmond Leslie, that book, the printing run of it was just over 125,000 copies. So what you had, primarily in the US, was 125,000 or so people in the US listening and reading and hanging on every one of George Adamski's words. This man who just happened to be saying that, communism was really good and the Russians had superiority over us. Now, again, that's not hearsay, that's official files. Not only that, though, the FBI got wind of a strange rumor and sinister rumor that on several occasions, Adamski, who lived in California at the height of all this, made trips to Los Angeles and met with Russian people in restaurants and bars. And one of the FBI's informants related this story, wasn't sure what was going on, but these people were supposedly, Russians who'd come over here and been given residency and so on. And the FBI got really concerned about the fact that not only was Adamski promoting communism, but he was also having clandestine meetings with Russians. And probably not a coincidence, it was right around this time that he really increased his stance on communism being a good thing. And, when you've got 125,000 people listening to you, and you're saying that communism is the way of the future, you can easily understand how U.S. intelligence got worked up and filled with anxiety by the fact that a good percentage of those people could actually have bought into it.
Well, I'm really happy that our the people in intelligence here in the United States are paying close attention to this. I mean, they should. There was a story a couple weeks ago about a woman back east who was involved in a murder because she was under the influence of this person that had this reptilian cult, and they're promoting the New World Order stuff and all of these things that are this is dangerous. I mean, this isn't. I don't know what people think, but I think that we really have to be diligent, especially right now, and look back at the history of the subject. And, why are the benevolent UFO beings, the Space Brothers, why are they tall whites? Why do they have blonde hair and blue eyes? I mean, there's so many things that we should be looking at, and we should not accept anything that we read online about this. So I commend you for writing this book, because I'm sure there will be a lot of people that might have something to say about that, because you're going against a lot of belief systems, delusional belief systems.
Well, thanks. I mean, the way I look at it, though, I've got thick skin. If somebody wants to argue with me, bring it on. I'll argue with them all night long, like I often do over at Jason Colavito's blog. We fight all the time. And that's primarily because, people have differing views on different things. But the fact is, I defy anyone to explain to me why, if the Russians are so friendly, why are there literally hundreds and hundreds of nuclear weapons aimed at us? It's ridiculous to even think that Putin, don't forget, Putin was a significant high-up figure in the KGB, and he was someone taught how to manipulate people. And, so when people say that there's nothing to this, that they're either deranged or they're too stupid to understand the situation, you know.
I just really love your candor and, the fact that you just let things roll. That's important, and it's true. I mean, there are unfortunately people in this subject who flock to this subject that, there are a lot of good people, and that's why I do this show. And I have lots of supporters who are intelligent and capable of making rational decisions and need good information. But there are people that continually go to these conferences and are taken over by these cult-like figures, that are trying to manipulate this subject for political purposes. It's insane.
Well, you're right, and I think that's an important thing you made there when you talk about, these groups become almost like cults, and that's when the dangerous side comes in, where, there's nothing wrong at all, having meetings of 50, 60, 100, every month or every other Sunday, talking about UFOs and hanging out and a few drinks and dinner and et cetera. You can find that all around the country. In fact, UFO groups around the world, and that's fine. But when it becomes something that's manipulative and you have like a guru kind of character in charge of it all, that's when it starts to cross the line and it becomes, something potentially dangerous when you're talking about mind manipulation. And certainly that happened in the 1950s when the whole contactee movements and the phenomenon of the Space Brothers and so on, during that era, there really was, something bordering upon, that sort of cult-like situation where thousands of people turned up, for example, at George Van Tassel's giant rock conferences in California every year. And at their height, those conferences had attendances in like 10, 11,000 people. I defy anyone to find your average conference in ufology today that has an audience of 11,000 people. It just doesn't happen. But a lot of those contactees, including some of the ones that Van Tassel invited to speak, also were approached by Russian assets, if you like, or even Russian agents. One of them was a guy named Orfeo Angelucci. Mm-hmm. And Orfeo Angelucci was sort of like one of the second levels of the contactee movement. And he wrote a number of books which essentially told the story in similar ways to a lot of the other contactees. They met these human-looking aliens, we want to help you, and so on. Now, at the height of his lecturing, Angelucci went on record as saying that on several occasions a mysterious and quite sinister group of 4 or 5 men approached him at several of his lectures. He couldn't place their accent, but it was a non-US, non-UK accent. He described it as being like European, and they said to him, "Look, if you will do something for us, we'll do something for you."
And I've got to cut you off right there because this is a really, really good story and we're getting ready to go to break. But I want to thank you for writing this book. It is incredibly important, especially given some of the games that are being played right now. People need to wake up and see the truth of the manipulation because there is something real. It deserves to be studied and respected. And we're not getting it right now in the UFO community. I'm here with my friend and colleague, Nick Redfern, who just released a book, Flying Saucers, From the Kremlin, UFOs, Russian meddling, Soviet spies, and Cold War secrets. You can get that on Amazon. So get it. I would highly recommend it. Nick is a great author. We will take a break and be right back.
Stand by. This is UFO Classified with Erica Lukes.
Erica Lukes.
The phone lines are open now at 702-425-9230. That's 702-425-9230. Worldwide callers use Skype name KCOR Radio. More UFO Classified.
UFO Classified
with Erica Lukes on the KCOR Digital Radio Network. After this.
Are you ready to expand your consciousness? Ready to dive deep within this profound planetary ascension? Then you're ready for the Universal Consciousness Show. Live Mondays, 11 a.m. Pacific, 2 p.m. Eastern. Hosted by Augie Nost and Diana Seraphim. It's time to expand your consciousness. A time to learn new modalities. to further understand
The all.
The Universal Consciousness Show will take you on a magical journey as you explore an array of possibilities. From the paranormal to UFOs and aliens, as well as banned medical cures, you'll learn to activate knowledge hidden deep within your DNA.
The Universal Consciousness Show.
Hosted by Augie Nost and Diana Seraphine. Live Mondays, 11 a.m. Pacific, 2 p.m. Eastern. Exclusively on the KCOR Digital Radio Network. A deeper understanding of the universe is but a show away.
Now, broadcasting in digital HD radio.
Toxins are everywhere, from the air we breathe to the food we eat and the water we drink. In a world where 80,000 known toxins and heavy metals threaten our very existence, how are you going to protect yourself and your loved ones? Introducing Pure Body Extra Strength, the world's first colloidal zeolite that helps trap and remove toxins as well as heavy metals from your body that are messing with your memory, clarity, sleep, and focus. Don't just take our word for it or the testimonials from our thousands of happy customers. Check out the hundreds of articles and case studies on the National Institute of Health website proving zeolite's powerful ability to remove toxins. For a limited time, listeners to KCOR will receive 10% off their first order. To get started, go to trypurebody.com and enter promo code RADIO10. Again, that's trypurebody.com. Toxic junk is all around us, but now you can take back control of your health and protect yourself by detoxing with Pure Body Extra Strength. You'll be on your way to sleeping better, thinking more clearly, and feeling more energetic. Go to trypurebody.com right now and get started today.
Are you ready? Ready to go inside the Matrix? Inside the Matrix.
You see, whoever controls technology controls the world.
Then tune in Sundays at 3 p.m. Pacific, 6 p.m. Eastern, as your host, Jimmy Brent, takes you deep inside the holographic Matrix.
Carefully designed to stimulate the mind.
Come explore a world of topics from technology, archaeology, spirituality, and so much more. Inside the Matrix will liberate you from the manipulated, parasitic entities of consciousness.
You guys ready for this?
It's time to claim your true natures as creative, divine beings inside the Matrix. Hosted by Jimmy Brent.
Who are we talking about?
Jimmy Brent. Live Sundays at 3 p.m. Pacific, 6 p.m. Eastern. Exclusively on the KCOR Digital Radio Network. Inside the Matrix. Investigating and analyzing the experience of life. Life.
You're listening to
UFO Classified with Erica Lukes, where the truth isn't hidden beneath the black lines of a Sharpie.
That's the craziest thing I've ever heard.
To be on with Erica, call 702-425-9230. That's 702-425-9230. Worldwide callers use Skype name KCOR Radio.
Radio contact.
Share your thoughts on the show on Twitter by using hashtag KCOR. Or head over to the live chats at KCORradio.com.
The audience goes nuts!
And now, your host of UFO Classified.
Are you ready?
Erica Lukes.
Erica Lukes.
Welcome back to UFO Classified. I was happy to be here, and I want to give a shout out to my incredible producer, Tina Marie, who has one of the best stations, well, the best station, who am I kidding, on the planet, KCOR. Tina does an exceptional job to make sure that my shows are produced with best quality. And for me, I would much rather be here on this station and have a show that is produced with integrity than to go to YouTube and do something that isn't going to be professional. So I appreciate that. And I also appreciate my fans, my friends, who support the show. It is important to do this and keep it on the air. This is a listener-supported show, so you can go to UFOclassified.com to donate, or you can also go to KCOR to do that. I want to thank Northern UFOs for always keeping track of me and supporting the show and posting in chat. That means the world to me. There isn't another show on, I can tell you right now, except for maybe Greg Bishop, even though we have two different shows, but you're not going to get the level of information that you're getting here, because I actually spend multiple hours every week researching this topic, and the topics that I talk about, I have spent over a decade looking into this. My files are incredible, and there's something here that we need to be very, very wary of right now. I mentioned in the opening of my show that we are at a critical time, and history is not only disappearing into dark holes because researchers are getting older and they're throwing it away, or they are donating it to anonymous sources where we don't have access to the information. Information from the United States is making its way overseas, and again, we don't have access to this information. So what is the game plan? Are we rewriting the history? Yeah, we're going to. And so we've got to do everything in our power to make sure we shine a spotlight on this and do the best to preserve the memory and the work of people who have gone before us and have sacrificed their jobs, their friends, their families, in some cases their lives. This is really important. I am joined here with my friend and colleague, Nick Redfern, he's just released a book called Flying Saucers from the Kremlin, UFOs, Russian Meddling, Soviet Spies, and Cold War Secrets. Nick has written over 45 books, and they're all a great read. I mentioned Final Events. You need to get that book as well. That has been a consistent theme in my research and Nick's. And so when we left off, we were talking about Adamski, who was involved in the contact team movement and the meetings that he had with Russian operatives, and how the fact that the FBI was so concerned that you can actually find documents on what they did. This is huge, as he manipulated the subject, and Nick was talking about Angelucci. So will you continue with that, Nick? And I'm sorry I cut you off right at the best point of your story.
That's fine. Yeah. Orfeo Angelucci, as I said before the break, was one of the not latter-day contactees, but he was not on the size in terms of popularity as people like George Van Tassel and George Adamski. But he certainly did, get a lot of coverage. He wrote several books, and he spoke quite often at George Van Tassel's conferences out at Giant Rock in the California desert. Now, on a number of occasions, by his own admission, Angelucci said that he was approached by a mysterious group of 4 or 5 men who he couldn't fully figure out what their accent was, but he basically came up with some sort of at least it was like a European accent of some sort. And they made sort of no bones about what they wanted. They wanted him to slant his accounts and lectures in relation to aliens. They wanted him to slant the whole approach along the lines of communism, as to say that the aliens that he'd met were sort of communist in nature. And Angelucci was very kind of worried about this. He didn't believe, that particular scenario at all. And he'd actually not found any evidence that they were. Did have a government not unlike, the Russians. But he was very concerned because he found out that the FBI was sort of clandestinely watching him as well. And Angelucci was someone who was a little bit sort of timid type character. And when he found out that the FBI were watching him, he totally freaked out. And he actually approached his local FBI office and explained all that went on, and that there was this group of people wanted him to slant his UFO stories down a communist approach, so to speak. And the FBI realized, that he wasn't a threat. He was as much as a dupe than anything else. These people were trying to use him. He was like a puppet on a string, And but what's particularly intriguing is that in one of his later books, Angelucci said that on one occasion he met with a guy in a diner in 20 Palms, California, to talk about UFOs. And this guy quite literally offered Angelucci this little pill and said, before we can talk about UFOs and what I know, I need you to take this pill. And Angelucci very unwisely just swallowed this pill, without any idea of what it was. And it's kind of like, the one famous scene in The Matrix, when Keanu Reeves is offered, the blue pill or the red pill. And Angelucci said he swallowed this pill, and within about 15 minutes, he started to feel like, wasted and stoned, and he saw this figure, like this little figure dancing in his drink. He'd clearly been hit with something possibly along the lines of LSD. Now, this period when this happened was 55. This is when the U.S. government was doing, and particularly the CIA was doing the MK Ultra mind control experimentation, which involved a lot of things like using hallucinogenics and things like this to alter the human mind. And Angelucci said that as he sort of, everything came tumbling out, and he talked to this mysterious character who referred to himself as Adam. And Angelucci sort of spilled his guts on the meetings with these communists or Russians, whatever they were. But on top of that, it became very clear to Angelucci that he could not stop spilling his guts. It was literally, as if he'd been hit with something that had really affected him badly. And he said that throughout this, there were two military guys in uniform sat at the diner booth next to him, watching the whole thing very intently, as if they were sort of monitoring it in case anything went wrong. And I point out in the book that almost certainly he was drugged by somebody in the intelligence community to really get him to open up what was going on, with this angle of the aliens being Russians and so on. And it's sort of really weird and sinister, but also fascinating angle, as to how he was essentially dosed up, as a means to get him to blow the whistle on everything he knew.
Interesting. And so I want to ask you, do you know any other people? Was APRO, were they suspect back in the day? Because from my understanding, they were reported as being a communist organization to the FBI.
Oh, yeah. There's no doubt about that at all. Some of the early groups like the CSI, APRO, they were all, I won't say they were all infiltrated, but at the very least, they were all, they were all leased, they were watched and listened to. And I don't think, the major concern was that these people, that these groups were all infiltrated. It was the fear that they could become infiltrated and used. But again, through the Freedom of Information Act, we know that a lot of these groups from the 50s and 60s were closely watched. For example, Albert Bender, who kicked off the whole Men in Black mystery in the early 50s, he set up, his own UFO group as well. And again, I was able to get on Bender, I was able to get about 50 or 60 surveillance pages from the FBI on Albert Bender. So just about everybody and his brother in the UFO field in that era was being watched to some degree. In fact, I don't know hardly of any of the contactees of that era who actually weren't being watched. There was Truman Bethlehem, Orfeo Angelucci, what I call the three Georges, George Funt Williamson, George Van Tassel, and George Adamski, and a bunch of others. And they were all being watched because in varying degrees they brought politics into their lectures, and they were influencing literally thousands of people. In some cases, as I said, out at Giant Rock, people in five figures, in excess of 10,000. And that wasn't just going on in the US. For example, one of the chapters I have in the book revolves around the Aetherius Society, which was a group established in the UK in the 1950s, but which now has its headquarters in Los Angeles. And it was created by a man named George King. Now, George King was a man who ran the Aetherius Society, and it was very much driven by contactee type experiences. Now, in the late 1950s, the intelligence arm of the British police force, which is called Special Branch, they opened a lengthy file on the Aetherius Society because at the height of all this, the Aetherius Society started to put out statements and would lecture and put on conferences talking about how we should get rid of our atomic weapons and essentially live in peace alongside the Russians. Now, Special Branch got very concerned about this because, like with the FBI in the US, significant numbers of people were listening to what was going on. Now, things came to sort of a pinnacle for Special Branch when they found out that every year, for literally about 5 or 6 years, members of the Etheria Society were taking part in demonstrations in London, demonstrating about, we need to get rid of our nuclear weapons and so on. And the Etheria Society attended all of these demonstrations. And what really concerned Special Branch was the fact that MI5, which is the British equivalent of the FBI, found out that a number of these demonstrations had actually been infiltrated by the KGB. And we were actually talking about literal Russian people smuggled into the UK and trying to get everybody fired up into saying, hey, we need to get rid of our nukes. And these people would specifically, be shouting and demonstrating and firing everyone up on the in the demonstrations. And so Special Branch were very concerned, that the Etheria Society, almost certainly fully innocently, weren't aware of what was going on, but they were sort of almost in a position of being reeled in by KGB operatives who also tried to subtly, promote the Russians are good angle in the same way that it was going on in the United States.
Oh, isn't all this interesting? And this is an important part of history that we need to pay attention to. And we're getting ready to go to break, but I just wanted to talk a little bit about this because back in October of 2018, and I'm sure most people don't know this, but there was a group, Chinese and Russians, who invited researchers, a handful of researchers from all over the world, to go over to Russia and spend a few days there. And they sat around in rooms and talked about UFOs and talked about all of the things that each country knew. And to me, the fact that didn't make the news or didn't even get out there in the UFO community is completely stupefying to me. I think that, if you've got Russian Navy admirals that are there and they're getting in with photo ops and all of these things. I mean, would we not maybe think that this was an attempt to get information from people about what our military is doing?
Well, I mean, the way I look at it is if anybody invited me over to Russia, the first thing I would think of, well, this isn't just being done for my benefit, and in fact, it might not be being done for my benefit at all. If the Russians are going to invite me over, it's because it's going to be to the Russians' benefit, And so, if somebody said to me, hey, do you want to come over to Russia for 2 weeks or whatever and talk about UFOs and, hang out and chat with everybody else, my first question wouldn't be, what's the vodka like out there? Are we going to have a good time? My first question would be, why are you inviting me? What's the role? What's the goal? And I think sometimes the excitement factor of, wow, I'm being invited to go to Moscow, that gets overwhelmed by the fact, people should be thinking, well, why am I being invited? What's the agenda? And who's pulling the strings on this agenda? And, it's very different. If somebody wants to invite you to a lecture to speak at in California or Nebraska, or wherever. But when you get invited to speak in Russia, you really have to think there's a reason for that which goes beyond just UFOs,
Yeah, yes, you would. And I have had Gary Hesseltine it was on my show a few months ago, and he was at that meeting, and I asked him about that towards the end of the show, which is really interesting. And so, again, we have to look at some of these things, and I have to wonder why in the world that wasn't put out there. I mean, how many people in the UFO community actually know that meeting took place? And why don't they?
Well, I would hope that they all, each and every one of them, ask questions as to why they were being invited. Now, if it's all innocent and fine, well, that's fine. But, I think it's kind of like being invited to North Korea, on a totally innocent reason. I don't think there's any innocent reason to go to North Korea at all, So I think we need to be very careful. And I mean, to give you an idea of how sort of closely these people were watched. And bear in mind today, with social media and the NSA, everybody is watched really closely. If you look at the files from the 1950s, I mean, they are massively extensive. There was no internet back then. There was nothing, and yet they were able to, collect a massive amount of information on all these contactees who were talking about communism, which sort of begs the question, how extensive are the files today on all of us? And the reason why I bring that up is because, let me give you one example from 1959 from the Australian Intelligence Services surveillance files, which I was able to get as well. Now, one of the people who the Australian Intelligence Services investigated was a woman named Sonja Lyubutin. Now, she was born in Yugoslavia and moved to Australia, but when she was born, and in her early years, she lived still in Yugoslavia, which at the time was very much a communist country. And when she moved to Australia, the Australian intelligence services were very, very concerned that when she joined this one particular UFO group, that she was infiltrating it on behalf of the Russians. Now, to give you an idea of how closely she was watched, there are a number of documents showing where the intelligence agencies were actually watching her every move. And by that, to give you a perfect example, on a number of occasions she flew to the US to take part in lectures. And the files actually contain information about those flights, but not just the flights, but also the airline she flew on, and even in the files, it's actually got the flight numbers that she was flying on. They're all contained in the files, and not only that, to demonstrate how deeply the intelligence services were looking into the private lives of all these people. Sonja was actually a big swinger. She put on swinging parties every month, and that's all in the files. So, in other words, this is 60 years ago, and the intelligence services who are watching controversial people in ufology, all of this was collected 60 years ago with minimum technology. So you think about it, just how much of our activities in ufology today are being watched when that was going on 60 years ago. They got flight numbers from, flying from Australia and back. They got party information, all sorts of things, all in the name of worries about people who might be twisting the UFO subject around a communist angle.
Yeah, and the whole thing is concerning and interesting, and again, it's like, how do you get people to pay attention to this and take it seriously? Because it's like, I can talk about this until I'm blue in the face, and you've got a great book, so hopefully people will give this topic some thought. But I mean, it's most of the people just don't even want to think that this could even be possible. And the thing that is so interesting to me are some of the people that have been researching this for decades still don't believe that the CIA could infiltrate organizations. I mean, what's up with that?
Well, I think part of it comes down to just ignorance of knowing what's going on in the world. I mean, that happens, unfortunately. And I think one of the big problems, particularly with politics today, is that the whole field of politics has just been dumbed down. And it's been sort of, where it is now is just politicians just literally calling each other's names, It's kind of like being at school, my dad's tougher than your dad kind of thing. And that's what politics is. It's just making, stupid claims about, stupid names, I mean, it's just ridiculous. Everything's been sort of just, brought down to its sort of lowest level. I mean, you have sort of, politicians deriding women, and, I mean, it's just crazy the way in which politics, which should be a very serious issue, has turned into a carnival, really. And a lot of people just don't even care, They just they're just happy not knowing. Well, that's kind of like a situation of, well, you deserve what you get, But that's how the world is, and I think we need to get back to a situation where, people look at politics for the important issue that it actually is, not just making stupid jokes and, berating women or whatever.
Oh, well, I dare to dream that would happen. But you never know. And again, I think for me, as much as I have my own political viewpoints, and I learned very quickly that I'm not going to express those on social media because to me, it's like as a person who is in the field, I want to focus on the manipulation of the subject and the fact that we are being infiltrated, and the fact that there is good, important research out there, and that's the thing. But we have to, I think this show is important because we have to highlight the fact that we are being manipulated. And I want to just throw in this little thing here. There are people who have assimilated themselves into the community now, and are pretty important people in the quote-unquote community, whatever that means, that are hiding behind anonymity. And to me, that is really alarming. And I do not know why people are so dense that they don't ask, especially when these people are not just doing good, grounded research, that they're actually discrediting people. I have to wonder why in the world people allow that sort of thing. Before we go to break, because we've got 1 minute, tell us your thoughts on hiding behind anonymity with regard to this subject.
Well, I think, there's no doubt that there's a great deal of anonymity, where people are hiding. The big question is, are they doing it themselves, or is there an agenda that's going on? And that's one of the things, I primarily talk about in the book, is that there are agendas at work here. It's not just done for whatever reason. But unfortunately, one of the bigger problems is that, particularly with education for kids and things like that, it's not like it was when we were kids, and society has been dumbed down. So, in other words, infiltrating and hiding is actually quite easy because most people don't really understand the situation and what's going on. There's God knows how many people, would sooner not listen about politics, but, watch a talking cat on YouTube or something.
Well, actually, some days that sounds a lot better than what
we
have to deal with.
I like to watch talking dogs and talking cats because it's fun. But the important thing is there's a place for it, and there's a place when we really need to talk about politics for the state of the world.
Absolutely.
So we don't all end up in a mushroom cloud.
Well, that would be helpful. I'm Erica Lukes here with Nick Redfern. Stick around. We're going to take a longer break, and we will be right back.
Listen very carefully.
This is Houston. Say again, please. Houston, we've had a problem.
This is UFO Classified, live every Friday night, 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern, exclusively on the KCOR Digital Radio Network. The truth is out there, just waiting to be discovered.
And now, if you will, accompany me on a journey to the future.
For more information on the host of UFO Classified, Erica Lukes, upcoming guests, as well as links to the past shows,
visit her website at ufoclassified.com.
UFO Classified.
UFO Classified.
This is KCOR Las Vegas, home of the Digital Radio Network, broadcasting from a shack just south of Area 51.
Wait, that doesn't exist.
This is the KCOR Digital Radio Network. Now for the news.
The disc landed at a ranch at Corona, New Mexico. The rancher turned it over to the Air Force. Rancher W.W. Brazil was the man who discovered the saucer.
What I thought was a star began coming in my direction at a very rapid rate of speed.
The unidentified object, which some sources thought might be a blimp, moved slowly down the Pacific coast from Santa Monica and disappeared south of Long Beach.
I saw a UFO, and it went down the river, turned right at the United Nations, turned left, and then down the river.
UFO Classified.
UFO Classified.
No more plausible deniability. Fact, fiction, or the truth? You decide. And now, the new voice of the high desert, the hostess of UFO Classified, Erica Lukes.
Welcome back to the second half of UFO Classified. I want to thank all of you for being here and then also getting the word out. You can see me. I have just this week been on the Travel Channel on UFOs, The Lost Evidence, and also on the Science Channel on NASA's Unexplained Files. So you can see those shows there. It has been great to have the opportunity to get my face out there and make acquaintances from 50 different countries. And that's where UFOs, The Lost Evidence, that's how wide that show is being played. And it's great because that gives me the ability to talk to people from all over and also to hopefully shine a light on some of the things that are taking place in this subject, things that most people have when they're just looking at it from the outside, don't have a clue about, and it is important. And we need to understand that this subject has been manipulated since the late 40s. It will continue to be manipulated. I always encourage people who want serious research to turn away from the United States of America and look at Norway to see the incredible work that Dr. Erling Strand and his team have done for 35 years in documenting different types of light phenomena. That really is important. There is something genuine about this. It deserves to be respected and appreciated and studied. And so we have to do our part to expose the corruption and all of this absolute nonsense that we are seeing and focus on good work. But you need to know all these things that you're hearing tonight. I'm here with Nick Redfern, who has just released a book called Flying Saucers from the Kremlin, UFOs, Russian Meddling, Soviet Spies, and Cold War Secrets. You can get the book on Amazon. I would recommend that. And this has been one of the most fascinating conversations that I've had with you, Nick, on the show. And I appreciate you coming on here. And I also appreciate the fact that you are one of those people that just is, you're going to put things out there and you don't care what other people say, because so many people in the UFO community are affected by that, and they're just kind of little sheeples, honestly.
Well, one of the reasons for that, I've been in the UFO subject a long time, and I get to see, a lot of what goes on behind the scenes, and I've seen so much, ass kissing to conference organizers. It's like, oh, please, book me on your conference, and I'll say just what you want me to say. Well, that's terrible. One of the reasons why there's certain conferences that won't have me is because I don't say what necessarily people want to hear, but what they want is people will want to hear, so they'll get 400 or 500 people on the seats, so to speak, at the conferences. And that's a sad thing, if you're interested in UFOs, you should be able to talk about the subject from any perspective and not have to feel that you've got to be pressured into talking about this or talking about that because it happens to be a pet, favorite of the conference organizer or whatever. That's pretty pathetic, really. But that's behind the scenes ufology. What do I have to say and do to get on your conference? That's how it sometimes comes to, and I've seen it, and it's pretty pathetic, really.
Oh, well, you know what? That's the way it rolls. So we'll just try to expose things. And I think it's good that you see that. Dear Lord. But let's get back to your book, because you have, you're talking about the Russians and how back in 1947 that they began to secretly spread bogus UFO stories and meddle in our activities. And so tell us a little bit more about how that happened and then when the CIA's Robertson panel came into play with regard to all of this.
Well, the CIA's Robertson panel, that sort of really gets to the heart of the whole subject, and it really goes back to the summer of 1952, when there was this wave of UFO activity across 2 weekends in the summer of 52 in and around Washington, D.C. and similar areas. And people, pilots, radar operators, military pilots, civilian pilots, were seeing bright lights and strange objects flying in the skies. And it became very clear, that something weird was going on. And before I go any further, it's important to note, that there is a real UFO phenomenon. That I'm a full-on believer in the existence of a genuine UFO phenomenon of unknown origins, and I think the 1952 wave was a genuine series of encounters with whatever the UFO phenomenon is. But what concerned this group called the Robertson Panel, which was established in the wake of this 52 wave, the big concern that the Robertson Panel had was that whether or not UFOs were real or not, that wasn't sort of their main area of research. Their big concern was, well, what if the Russians decided to jam our communication systems by claiming that UFOs were invading the US? And, they orchestrated it to the point where there are thousands of people quite literally jamming all the airwaves, and they were talking about seeing UFOs coming over. The fear that the Robertson Panel had was that this could be some sort of like a precursor to a sneak attack by the Russians. And while we were looking for UFOs and listening to all these jammed emergency channels, we would miss the fact that this was actually like a dupe and that the Russians were launching their missiles. But we were looking into all these UFO stories, which actually, were part of this Russian agenda. So that was the Robertson Panel's big concern, that the Russians would use the UFO subject in the 50s as a tool of hysteria and concern and paranoia that either the aliens were communist or that they were Russian, and either scenario sort of puts the foot in the Russians' plant, so to speak. So, this is how it all really began and took off in the 50s, this concern of the Russians and communists within the United States using the UFO phenomenon to frighten people and have people believe that, the Russians were in league with aliens and the aliens just happened to be communists and socialists and so on. And this was still going on. I mean, it's not like just something from the 40s, 50s, or 60s and 70s. I mean, we know now, again through the Freedom of Information Act, that this was going on well into the 80s and 90s. I mean, a classic example, which you'll know all about, Erica, the story of Paul Benowitz, who Greg Bishop very skillfully told the story in his book Project Beta, which came out in 2005. Now, Benowitz was someone who was deeply interested in UFOs, had a company that backed onto Kirtland Air Force Base in New Mexico, and he was someone who started to see in the skies over Kirtland and the surrounding areas what he believed were alien craft. And he got very concerned about this, contacted his local congressman, senator, the intelligence community, and Kirtland Air Force Base. And so what happened, an intelligence program was established to try and destabilize Benowitz by feeding them these totally bogus horror stories about aliens living under New Mexico and that they were abducting people and using them in all sorts of terrible operations and experiments, taking organs out of people. And the point came when Benowitz could not stand this any longer, and he had sort of like a psychological breakdown and walked away from the UFO subject. But the stories, for the most part, I'm not saying there wasn't a real UFO angle to all this. I think in one sense there was, but it was sort of over-exaggerated to essentially cause Benowitz to have this psychological collapse. And he walked away from ufology, which was almost certainly the goal of all this. But that's sort of one example of how into the 80s, there was this situation of manipulation going on. But another one, which is kind of related to all this because the time frame and some of the players were the same, was the Majestic 12 documents, which surfaced publicly in 1987 through the UFO team at the time of Stan Friedman, Jamie Chandray, and Bill Moore, who co-wrote the book The Roswell Incident. Now, for people who don't know, back in '87, these MJ12 documents surfaced. They were believed to have been leaked by U.S. government insiders, and they talked about the Roswell crash, alien autopsies, and this group called Majestic 12, or alternately MJ12, having been sort of keeping the lid on all of this material and essentially hiding it from everybody. And since then, since '87, literally dozens of documents on MJ12 have surfaced, and it amounts to literally thousands of pages of material now. But the big question is, are these documents real or not? Well, I used the Freedom of Information again, specifically in relation to this, regarding the FBI. And I learned from looking into the FBI's files that they had looked into 3 different scenarios for the MJ12 documents. One was the possibility, well, could they actually be the real thing? You know, was there really an MJ12, aliens crashed at Roswell, and this group was established to hide all of this from the public and the media, etc., etc. That was the one theory. Now, the other theory, the second theory that was put together, was that U.S. intelligence created the documents, fed them to the Russians to try and terrify the Russians into thinking that we got our hands on alien technology and we were fabricating it and, you know, on the verge of creating high-tech alien weapons. And the third theory, which is why I mentioned this in the book, was the scenario of the Russians having created the Majestic 12 documents. And that was the most popular theory within the FBI. The FBI suspected that the MJ12 documents had been created by the Russians, by intelligence agents within Russia, and the Russians knew that within various U.S. defense contractor companies, the Russians knew that there were a number of people in these contract companies in the U.S. Who were also into UFOs. And so the CIA and the FBI got very worried that the scenario was that the Russians would be dangling these documents, totally fabricated Russian documents, dangling these documents to people who worked in the U.S. Defense Department and defense contractors, and they would say, well, you know, we'll give you more and more of these MJ12 documents if you tell us a little bit about the stealth fighter and the stealth bomber. And this was prior to them being released and put on display. And so the Americans' fear was that the Russians fabricated the documents as a means to reel people in, and there would, in other words, from the Russians' perspective, it would be a case of the Russians would get all this top secret material from U.S. defense contractors who had interest in UFOs, and all that these same contractors would get in return would be bogus documents from the Russians. And that was the biggest theory that the FBI thought was behind all this. So even with the MJ12 documents, there was deep concern within U.S. intelligence that it could all go back to the Russians.
And that is fascinating. And I have to ask you, with regard to some of these things that are being put forward, I mean, what do you think about Area 51? What do you think about Bob Lazar's claims? What do you think about some of these things? Because for me, I wonder if this isn't a red herring. I wonder if maybe, I don't know. I have a lot of questions about that, and I wonder why in the world any of these things would be allowed to get out to the media or the public if they were truly happening. So what are your thoughts on that? Not to take you out on a different,
No, that's
topic,
totally
but
fine,
I will.
because it's actually part of the same story, but just sort of, brought up to more recent times. But what I would say about Lazar, first and foremost, I don't think he was a liar. Now, there are a lot of people in ufology who just thought, Lazar was a fantasist, a liar, a hoax, or whatever. I mean, even Stan, bless him, Stan, actually, when he heard Bob Lazar's story, I'm quoting him exactly now, he said, and I quote, "This is bunk, bunk, bunk." He said it 3 times like that. And Stan, to his dying day, did not believe that Lazar was anything other than a hoaxer. Now, I don't think Lazar was a hoaxer because he doesn't sort of follow the typical path of hoaxers. Now, what I mean by that is that, I mean, I've come across a lot of hoaxers, you know, over the years, and you can pick them out easy. You know, they've got a very controversial and fascinating story. They go on the lecture circuit. They maybe do like 2 years of lectures, and then the story dries up. And then they think, oh, now what happens? Now what do I do? And suddenly they've had more experiences, and they get booked for more and more conferences and things like that. You know, so that they're looking always to be back in the public domain. Now, Lazar never wrote a book on his experiences. You know, no movies made about him. His story never changed, and more importantly, he never added to it, like so many contactees used to do that. You know, some of the hoaxing ones, they just wanted to get more and more material. You know, they would create more and more material, so they get more and more lectures. Lazar never did that. He only gave a handful of lectures, so he doesn't fit the bill of a typical hoaxer.
But let me just ask you, though, what about the people around him? Because were the people around him making money off of his story?
Well, I mean, I don't know about that personally, but I mean, I don't think he himself was driven to hoax this. Now, what I would say, one of the things that a lot of people don't know is that by his own admission, Lazar said that on several occasions when he allegedly flew out to this portion of Area 51 known as S4, he said that when he would fly, by the time he was flying back, he couldn't remember what he'd actually done in the last 3 or 4 days of work that he'd done. And he came to believe that, you know, he'd done work for the people out at S4, you know, sort of, you know, trying to re-engineer alien technology. But he came to believe, or at least suspect, that his mind had been altered to the point where he was deliberately, you know, his mind of the last few days was deliberately wiped out, you know, as a means to protect security. So whatever leads and, you know, that he'd made during the course of that week or whatever, it had been to the advantage of the people on the program, but he couldn't remember any of it. And he said that happened on a number of occasions. And so, you know, I mean, several minds when it comes to Lazar. What I would say for sure is I don't think he was just a straightforward hoaxer, but I think he was used in some sort of manipulative program designed to possibly even freak out the Russians in relation to that, because, you know, I mean, this is like the most secret military base in the world, never mind just the United States, and the most fortified one. And suddenly this guy Lazar pops up. Not only does he do that, but he tells this huge, incredible story, you know, and I have to wonder, why did he do it? You know, he just said he wanted to get the word out. But what if he himself didn't even know what the agenda was? But maybe, you know, he was subtly pushed to go public. And maybe the reason was to try and convince the Russians that we've got alien technology. Maybe we do. But if we don't, then it would be to our advantage to pretend that we have. And maybe that's, you know, what his goal was.
Huh, interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I mean, that's the thing. You just never know where people's stories are coming from, and I think the more I look into this, and the more I look at some of the people involved and some of the stories they've been pushing for decades and things, the more you have to wonder where that's coming from. And I think, you know, like I said, we need to do research and not accept things for face value, especially because people are promoting their things on social media, or they're getting all of these lectures at different conferences and things. I mean, at some point in time, we're going to hold people accountable in the UFO community, people who are leaders in the UFO community for not doing what's right for the people involved in this, the witnesses, and also the subject, because there's a lot of, I don't know what, you know how I feel about this. We've talked a lot about the fact that this subject is just, it's never a dull moment, but we deserve the best. You know that. So
yeah. But there's one other thing that people might find interesting, and it relates to both Russia, to the US and the UK in a strange way. and it all revolves around a woman named Alice Bradley Sheldon. Now, Alice Bradley Sheldon was a sci-fi writer who wrote under the alias of a man named James Tiptree, and her books were very, very popular as sci-fi, but nobody realized that Alice was actually a man. That her character was a man, but that she was really a woman. But the interesting thing is that Alice Bradley Sheldon, as well as writing sci-fi, she was actually an intelligence officer in the CIA for years. And what's particularly intriguing is that she shot herself and killed herself and her husband just 2 weeks after the original MJ-12 documents surfaced. And one of the rumors is that she actually may have had some sort of knowledge of these documents, and part of her work in the CIA was trying to confuse the Russians by creating fabricated documents. And the story of Alice Bradley Sheldon is a fascinating one as to how, she was actually hired by the CIA, and at the same time that she was writing sort of alien-based sci-fi. And it's sort of a fascinating story of how her sci-fi work actually, sort of crossed over with her intelligence work. So, a number of people in the British Ministry of Defence, although they wouldn't speak on the record, talked about how they claimed that at least some of the UFO documents in the public domain were put together by Alice Sheldon as a means to sort of concern and worry the Russians that we really did have alien technology. But I would recommend people to look up Alice Bradley Sheldon and the fact that she was working for the CIA, writing sci-fi at the same time, working on intelligence and disinfo programs, but also on top of that, killing herself and her husband right around the time the MJ-12 documents surfaced, which is sort of a very kind of odd timing,
Yeah, that is odd timing, and that is fascinating. Yeah. Thank you for letting me know about her, because I would like to look into all of that as well. So tell people where, obviously Amazon to find your new book. You are also going to be going on a cruise next week, which we'll talk about when we get back from break, because I know we only have 30 seconds. You've got a lot going on, as always. But just tell people really quickly where they can find you next. What show are you speaking on?
Well, the new book's Flying Saucers from the Kremlin, and you can get that off Amazon, also off the shelves in Barnes & Noble. And then in September I have another book called The Alien Book. It's sort of like an A to Z of all the various alien encounters and creatures that have been reported.
Well, that'll be good. We'll talk a little bit more about your upcoming work when we get back. I'm Erica Lukes here with Nick Redfern. We will be right back.
Stand by.
This is UFO Classified with Erica Lukes.
Erica Lukes.
The phone lines are open now at 702-425-9230. That's 702-425-9230. Worldwide callers use Skype name KCOR Radio. More UFO Classified.
UFO Classified.
With Erica Lukes on the KCOR Digital Radio Network. After this.
13,000 years ago, the world started its descent into the Dark Ages. History, as we know it, is about to be rewritten in The Emissary, a thrilling new reincarnation fantasy adventure by Tamara Veach and Rennie DeFazio. Ancient mysteries, an epic love story, and the timeless struggle of good versus evil unfold in The Emissary. Available now on Amazon.com. Once you pick it up, you won't want to put it down.
Vegas, baby!
Vegas' #1 source for talk and new music.
How cool is that?
1 million miles till midnight. A story of timelines, artificial worlds, simulated races, and the galactic imprint, and the destiny of a blue world called Earth. 1 million miles till midnight, written by Solaris Blue Raven, is a journey through the mind's eye which allows the reader to surf a wave of technological and multidimensional intellect, revealing a bridge between conscious design and the truth. A multidimensional bleed-through awakens the world of artificial intelligence to set sail into the frontiers of a vast multiverse, morphing planets and terraforming ascended worlds beyond the linear programs of a fated race. 1 million miles till midnight will awaken, inspire, prepare, and enlighten one to the many multidimensional states of consciousness and worlds we reside in. With every cell and atom, we are this truth and multiverse. 1 million miles till midnight. Written by Solaris Blue Raven. Available now at Amazon.com. Don't wait. Get your copy today.
There is a world outside that which we live in. A realm where fact and fiction collide. The Paradigm Matrix. The Paradigm Matrix. Hosted by Willie Miranda. Every Friday night at 6 p.m. Pacific, 9 p.m. Eastern.
The Matrix is everywhere. It is all around us, even now in this very room.
The 1 hour show that will surely leave you hanging on the edge of the rabbit hole. The Paradigm Matrix explores a universe of topics from UFOs, cryptozoology, conspiracies, as well as all things paranormal.
Enter a world of the twisted and deformed.
Friday night, 6 p.m. Pacific, 9 p.m. Eastern. The Paradigm Matrix. Exclusively on the KCOR Digital Radio Network, where fact and fiction collide.
1, 2, 3, 4!
To the KCOR Digital Radio Network.
I love the way it sounds.
Love the music. I listen all day.
The future of radio is here and now.
You're listening to UFO Classified with Erica Lukes, where the truth isn't hidden beneath the black lines of a Sharpie.
That's the craziest thing I've ever heard.
To be on with Erica, call 702-425-9230. That's 702-425-9230. Worldwide callers use Skype name KCOR Radio.
Radio contact.
Share your thoughts on the show on Twitter by using hashtag KCOR. Or head over to the live chats at KCORradio.com.
The audience goes nuts!
And now, your host of UFO Classified.
Are you ready?
Erica Lukes.
Erica Lukes. Welcome back to the final segment of UFO Classified. I am always happy to see you in here in chat, asking great questions. Again, this is a listener-supported show, and so I appreciate any support that I can get. To me, this show has been worth over the years paying for, because there is something really important going on, and most people aren't getting it. And I think sometimes when people have shows on other networks, they get paid by advertisers. A lot of those people are not UFO researchers, the talk show hosts, and so they don't understand. They have to put forward certain things to keep advertisers. I don't do that, because I believe that when you are beholden to advertisers and things like that, you have an agenda and you have to fulfill it. So this is true, unadulterated research. The show is here because I think that we all deserve the truth and we're not getting it. So thank you for supporting UFO Classified. I'm here with Nick Redfern, who has just released a book that you can get, as he mentioned before break, on Amazon: Flying Saucers from the Kremlin, UFOs, Russian Meddling, Soviet Spies, and Cold War Secrets. There is a lot going on. He mentioned at the first part of the show, George Adamski and some of his connections, and the fact that Adamski could really reach out to the masses and influence this group mind think. It is dangerous, and I also believe that this is going on now, and we need to be mindful of that. We need to step away from thinking that the UFO subject needs to be associated with political agendas or religious agendas. We should be able to do research and step back and look at this critically, but that's, again, not happening. So we need to shine a spotlight on some of the players or countries involved in discrediting or creating all of these bombs to distract us. I mentioned at the very first of the show, and I want to repeat this again for those of you who are just tuning in, that I have an anonymous source who is in national security that has informed me that the Russian IRA, the Internet Research Agency, and the Russian GRU routinely penetrates American UFO online social networks to create fake social accounts, websites, and to spread disinformation and destructive things, discord, discontent, and much, much more. They're tracking down people who are in the community and working potentially with the U.S. military. This is very concerning. We need to pay attention to this, especially now with all the UFO news that is coming out about the Navy and different things. So keep your eyes open and make sure that I would honestly limit your time on social media. That would be my first thought there. Before we get back to Nick Redfern, I want to just say that next week's show will probably be, without a doubt, one of the biggest bombshells and one of the best shows that I have ever done. I have someone who is coming forward that is going to blow the lid off a few things. So get ready for next Friday's show. It'll be fun to see the reactions from the show. But back to Nick Redfern, back to the fact you were talking about Alice Bradley Sheldon and the fact that she had a very curious life and a very curious, a very sad death in all of this. Give us a little bit more information about that before we move on to a couple other subjects with regard to your book.
Well, yeah, basically, she was someone who, after Pearl Harbor happened in December 41, the terrible attack on Pearl Harbor, she thought, what can I do, to help against the cause against Hitler? And so she joined the military and was very attracted to the world of intelligence, and disinformation and creating, diversions, that kind of thing. And then after the Second World War was over, she joined the CIA, which was created in 1947, and she was offered a position there, and she met her husband there as well. They married, and so you had like a married couple both working in the CIA. But Alice, she was deep into sci-fi, and a lot of her sci-fi was extraterrestrial themed, alien themed. And the story gets interesting because there have been a lot of rumors over the years that Alice Bradley Sheldon may actually have created some of these controversial UFO documents, supposedly leaked documents. But the theory is that she created the documents on behalf of her controllers, if you like, within the CIA. And so the plan was to create totally bogus UFO documents, feed them to Russia, and have the Russians freak out that that something was going on that they didn't know about, that we got the upper hand. And then 20, 30 years later, people, get their hands on these documents she created and think they're the real thing, That's sort of how the scenario works. But, to give you an example of how and why this works, this is something I talk about in the book as an example, but it actually has nothing to do with UFOs. But I use it in the book as a demonstration as to how easily it is to sort of have government agencies running around like headless chickens because of fake rumors. One, for example, in 1950, the FBI got rumors that the Russians had got atomic weapons posted and hidden, so to speak, in about 7 or 8 U.S. cities, like, for example, New York, Los Angeles, Las Vegas, Chicago. And the FBI got extremely concerned by this. How can we find out where these bombs are? How can we prevent them from being detonated? And for about 2 years, the FBI ran a program trying to get to the bottom of this story, in states of almost like total fear that one day, 9 or 10 bombs were going to suddenly detonate on one day, and kill millions. And by the end of the program, the FBI came to realize that there were no smuggled atomic bombs in the U.S., and we weren't under a possible case of attack, from within the inside, the FBI came to the conclusion this was actually a creation of the KGB, which it turned out to be. But for years, a couple of years, you had the FBI spending a lot of time, manpower, and money looking into this and diverting them away from real issues, when in reality the Russians had just created it as a means to, have U.S. intelligence just in a state of fear. So, there's no UFO angle, but it does demonstrate how easy it is to manipulate the other side with rumors that sound plausible enough that, the other side is going to look into it.
Interesting. And thank you for that. And I want to ask you about some of, I don't know if you broached this in your book, but some of the people that are Nazi sympathizers that have infiltrated the community since the late 40s. What can you tell us about that?
Well, yeah, this is a big interest of mine because it's very different in one sense to what we've got with the Russians. On the one side you've got the communism, ultra-left, and then you've got a lot of these sort of racist characters, ultra-right as well. And, from the early years of ufology, there have been people in the UFO subject who have backgrounds, in disturbing groups and organizations, and ones you can only sort of refer to them as racist, And I've come across a number of these people at conferences and lectures where, for example, they have this sort of disturbing fascination with Nazi technology and the idea of, Nazi sources and that kind of thing. This actually popped up a couple of years ago when me and Greg Bishop went to the Roswell UFO Festival in the summer of 2017, and there was actually 3 different conferences on that weekend. That's how many people were coming along and wanted to listen to lectures. And there was this one guy sitting by me and Greg at our table and started talking about Roswell and Russia, and German technology and so on and things like this. And he got more and more sort of around to the idea that the Nazis, well, they weren't that bad after all. And I was like, you're joking, right? And he said, no, they're just misunderstood. And it really sort of flared up to the point where Greg almost had to physically intervene. He didn't quite come to that, but we were almost there. But there are a lot of people in ufology, there's no doubt about it, who have sort of adhered themselves to extreme right-wing groups. I'll give you an example, one that a lot of people won't know anything about. There was a group in the UK known as APEN, which was the Aerial Phenomena Inquiry Network. And this group, APEN, surfaced out of nowhere in the mid-1970s in England, and they basically said they were a UFO group, they wanted to stay anonymous, and they got insider sources and contacts, and that they could benefit and help everybody else in ufology. Now, it turned out that a lot of the communications that APEN sent out to the UFO researchers in the UK in the 70s, it was clearly like Nazi propaganda. And it didn't take too long to realize, for the people who were ufologists back in the 70s then, it didn't take them long to realize that this group, this anonymous group, APEN, were actually trying to indoctrinate people into Nazism, but do it under like the cover of a UFO banner. Let's reel people in, who are interested in UFOs, and bit by bit, subtly, even more and more subtle, find ways to use this angle of Nazism to recruit them, and bring them round to like a Nazi ideology, but do so under a UFO cover. And the APEN group were around for 5 or 6 years, then they suddenly vanished. And that's like a perfect example of using UFOs as a means to control people through, Nazi beliefs and so on. And in many respects, it almost identically mirrors what was going on with the Russians and communism. It was just 2 different types of, belief systems.
Well, and this is really interesting. And back when back in the NICAP days, there were reports that ACUF actually sold the NICAP email list to a group in Canada, and they were Nazi sympathizers. So, what does that say about everything, and what does that say to people that should be like I said, this whole subject, as you're putting forth in your book, has been manipulated, and that is frightening, and it doesn't help any of us.
Well, that's the problem, is that, manipulation is only a danger when it works. And the problem is it very often works in ufology because people in ufology very often listen to what they want to hear. If it's, if it doesn't sort of revolve around what they want to hear, they forget about it. So, it's like with the Apen group, not only did they sort of promote the Nazi side of all of this, but they also promoted and prompted the more sort of intriguing cases that they knew were going to intrigue people and draw them in. So, that's the problem. When you've got people who are sort of not looking into things to the extent that they should be, and they're gullible and being dragged in because it's exciting, then that's how manipulation really works. It's like a recruitment, and slapping somebody on the back and say, hey, thanks for coming on board, you're an important person, you'll have your own title and button, with your own title on your shirt or whatever. And that's how these come
with a title. That'd be good.
But hopefully it doesn't say anything about Nazis, though.
Probably not.
But yeah, that's how a lot of these people get reeled in. It's like give them a sense of self-importance.
Yes.
And then they'll do anything. And that's why, that the Nazis grew and grew, because, they were sort of, this approach that you're an important player in the organization, and that kind of thing. And when really they're just a bunch of racist thugs,
Would there be like a specific organization that you're talking about? I'm just kidding. I just had to throw that out there. But when we talk about the fact that unfortunately racism and sexism and all of these things have dominated, unfortunately, this subject, and there seems to be a large organization, MUFON, that doesn't seem to care about that, and they also like to, here's your title. Here, let me give you 50 titles, and we'll kind of do what you can. And then in the meantime, when people are promoting racist ideas and sexist ideas, the executive director, Jan Harzan, does nothing to step up to the plate and act like a leader. I just had to throw that in there because it makes me feel much better. And I think this is important. But really quick, what are your thoughts on that? Just to throw that little landmine out there.
Well, yeah, there's no doubt that, there are significant racist figures and have been in ufology. You only have to look at the contactee movement of the 1950s. The aliens were all blonde-haired, blue-eyed, and, 6'2", 6'3" guys. And although there was sort of like a communist approach to it from the ideologies and so on, just that angle. Oh yeah, the alien just happened to be blonde and blue-eyed. You can learn a great deal from that to start with, and of course, people who actively promote the Nazi saucer angle. Now, there's no doubt that the Nazis did develop some odd-looking aircraft in the 40s. There's no doubt about that, but that's very different to saying, like some people do, that there are secret groups of Nazis hiding out here and there, and they've got these massive technologies and so on, which is just really like propaganda. But when you brought up again, the issue of women. I've seen this in ufology, that like a bunch of old guys in ufology who've been in their groups for years. I've seen it where they do get intimidated by women, and there's no reason why they should. What it does, it just says far more about them than it does about anything else. It demonstrates that they get intimidated, and that's because, it's because they're pathetic individuals, really. And so they feel they have to demoralize you or whatever, and I've seen that happen a lot, but I'm sure you get that in a lot of organizations, whether it's UFOs or not, but I've particularly seen it in ufology, where there's this, like a clique, like the elite, we've been running this for years, we don't need, this person or that person on board, and again, it says far more about human beings than it does about the real UFO phenomenon. But again, all this comes down to is the other side of ufology. There is a real UFO phenomenon, but from the other side of things, there's the way in which a real phenomenon has been hijacked for significantly different purposes.
So what are your hopes then? I mean, you're shining a light on an important subject, and people need to understand this. And I think you're one of the few people that has actually spoken out on this, written a book about it. And I love the fact that you don't even care. This is the way it is. Look at the history. And that, at the end of the day, it's like you have documentation. You can look at all of this and see that this is a very disturbing pattern that has taken place, and it's something that we need to look at very seriously. And so, I mean, what do you hope that people will really, really learn and take away from your book?
Well, I would hope people would come away from it realizing that, yes, there is still a genuine UFO phenomenon. There's no doubt about that, because, what got me interested in all this was my dad's encounter. He was a radar mechanic in the British Royal Air Force, and he was involved in 3 incidents. And so, there's no doubt in my mind there's a real phenomenon. But I hope people would realize that there is this important other aspect to it all. And that other aspect revolves around how intelligence services have actively manipulated the phenomenon as a reason to try and alter the mindset of people on the other side. The Russians trying to affect us. And I think people should realize that the UFO subject and the phenomenon isn't just about aliens. It's also about trying to control the masses in various different ways. And I think, that angle is, in many respects, it's just as important as the possibility of finding alien life. But the problem is, within so much of ufology is driven by what people want to hear. That's why, for example, somebody writes a book that's really pro-alien and somebody else writes a book that isn't. Well, which ones are going to sell? The pro-alien ones, because that's what people want to hear. So, there's a lot of psychological aspects to this, but I guess I would leave people with the words that basically, yes, there's a real phenomenon. Yes, it's been manipulated for political and mind-altering reasons, and changing people's perspectives on politics. And it's all being done. This is the important thing. It's all being done in many respects without the people who are targeted actually realizing what's happening to them until it's too late, So I would say to people that, the ufology is far more deeper in many respects than so many people assume. And people need to realize that we have been manipulated by the Russians. It still goes on. And anyone who has hundreds and hundreds of missiles pointed at us is not our friend.
Absolutely, and I couldn't agree with you more. And I think I appreciate you driving that point home. And I want to stress, and I hope that people actually listen to this, you cannot trust Facebook. There are people who are in there hiding under anonymity that are disturbing the situation. They're gathering info. That info is disappearing overseas, which is very disturbing. There's so much going on, so please be conscious of all of this and make sure that you are educated and grounded in your approach to this. There is a genuine phenomenon. It deserves the best. It deserves to be looked at, and we deserve more than this. So, Nick Redfern, I wanted to say thank you always for being such a wonderful guest on my show. I think you've been on my show more than anybody I know. Maybe Barry Greenwood, but it's like, you've done so much, and I want to have you back again so we can talk about final events and some of the research that I think both of us have been doing with regard to the Collins Elite, and this might all play into some of that. So best of luck on your cruise. I am Erica Lukes, and make sure that you are here next week, because next week, like I was giving you a little teaser, next week is going to be a really big show. You won't want to miss it. It will probably be one of the biggest shows I've ever done, and it might make a few people uncomfortable who are promoting things that aren't necessarily the truth with regard to things that are important. So make sure you go to UFOclassified.com to learn more. You can find me on Facebook, Twitter. I'm trying to be better about my social media presence, but let me just tell you, I need somebody to keep track of me. I want to thank Northern UFOs for being such a support to the show. I hope all of you have a wonderful night. Stick around for a great night on KCOR. Check out Amazon to find out or to purchase Nick's book. I will be providing links. Stick around because we have a wonderful night on KCOR. Be safe, and I will catch you next week for a really big show.
Listen very carefully.
This is Houston. Say again, please. Houston, we've had a problem.
This is UFO Classified, live every Friday night, 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern, exclusively on the KCOR Digital Radio Network. The truth is out there, just waiting to be discovered.
And now, if you will, accompany me on a journey to the future.
For more information on the host of UFO Classified, Erica Lukes, upcoming guests, as well as links to the past shows,
visit her website at UFOclassified.com.
UFO Classified.
UFO Classified.
This is KCOR Las Vegas, home of the Digital Radio Network, broadcasting